I'm an actor by trade, but I'm an activist by nature. Somebody who's always believed that we must find the balance between what we develop for our survival and what we preserve for survival.
In Hollywood, fame doesn't necessarily guarantee lasting success. Time and time again, we've seen stars rise to global fame, surrounded by fans and fortune, only for everything is I to come crashing down.
I didn't have any idea that things were going to decline after that for so many reasons.
Robert Redford is no exception, though he reached incredible heights in his career as an actor, director, and producer. He eventually found himself facing a series of personal and financial challenges.
Robert Redford says he plans to retire from acting soon to concentrate on directing and art.
But what exactly went wrong for Redford? From rumored financial setbacks to personal losses, here's a closer look at the struggles he faced and how he's living today.
I try to avoid that, but I think it's unavoidable.
You know, I can't do this forever. I've been doing it since I was 21. As you move into your 80s, you say, hey, that's enough.
Background on Robert Redford. A lot of the time, when we see celebrities, we think of them as these mini-god, untouchable people who have it all. Fame, fortune, everything they could ever want. And because of that, we just assume their lives are perfect. But the truth? Many of them are dealing with struggles we never see. That was definitely the case for Robert Redford. Redford shot to massive, almost unimaginable fame for his role in Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, where he played a sharpshooting outlaw who was so cool and confident. This role made him a star, and it brought in serious money too. But somewhere along the way, things started to shift. So what exactly? Keep watching to find out. From battling personal battles to losing two of his children, Redford life has been anything but easy. But before we get into that, who was Robert Redford before the fame and the many tragedies? One of the most iconic actors of his generation, Redford was born on August 18th, 1936, in Santa Monica, California, to Martha Woodruff Redford, originally from Austin, Texas, and Charles Robert Redford Sr., an accountant. He also has a paternal half-brother named William. Redford's heritage is a blend of Irish, Scottish, and English roots. His great-great-grandfather, Elisha Redford, a Protestant Englishman, married Irish Catholic Mary Ann McCreary in Manchester, England, before they immigrated to New York City in 1849. They later settled in Stonington, Connecticut, where their son Charles began the family line that carried on the Redford name. On his mother's side, the Harts hailed from Galway, Ireland, and the Greens were Scotch-Irish immigrants who arrived in the U.S. in the 18th century. Redford grew up in Van Nuys, California, while his father worked in El Segundo. The family often traveled to Austin to visit his maternal grandfather, and Redford credits those childhood visits with sparking his environmental values and his lifelong love of nature. He attended Van Nuys High School, where one of his classmates was future baseball legend Don Drysdale. Redford has described himself as a poor student who found more inspiration in art and sports than in academics. He even had the chance to hit tennis balls with Pancho Gonzalez at the Los Angeles Tennis Club, helping the champion warm up before matches. After graduating in 1954, he enrolled at the University of Colorado Boulder, where he joined the Kappa Sigma fraternity and worked at a local bar and restaurant called The Sink. Today, a mural of his likeness still hangs there. However, his time in college didn't last long. He began drinking heavily, lost his scholarship, and was eventually expelled. After leaving school, Redford set out to travel through Europe, spending time in France, Spain, and Italy. Like many rising stars of his era, Redford got his start in New York, working in both theater and television. He made his Broadway debut in Tall Story in 1959 and rose to prominence with Neil Simon's hit play Barefoot in the Park in 1963. Around the same time, he began landing TV roles on popular series like Maverick and Perry Mason. After appearing opposite Marlon Brando in The Chase, Redford reprised his Broadway role in the 1967 film adaptation of Barefoot in the Park, co-starring with Jane Fonda. The movie was a success, launching Redford into stardom. From there, he starred in a string of acclaimed films, including The Candidate, Jeremiah Johnson, The Way We Were, and All the President's Men. In 1978, he and business partner Sterling Van Wagenen co-founded what would become the Sundance Film Festival, now one of the most important platforms for independent cinema. Redford also stepped behind the camera, making his directorial debut with Ordinary People, which earned him an Academy Award. He went on to direct several notable films, including A River Runs Through It, Quiz Show, and Lions for Lambs. Despite his success as a director, Redford never left acting behind. He starred in the intense survival drama All Is Lost, joined the Marvel Universe in Captain America, The Winter Soldier, and reunited with Jane Fonda for the romantic drama Our Souls at Night. In 2018, he appeared in what he called his final film role, The Old Man and the Gun, alongside Sissy Spacek. But even with all the acclaim and iconic roles, Redford's story goes much deeper. His real life was filled with heartbreak, close calls, and pain that went way deeper than most people realized. Robert Redford's battle with polio. Sure, Redford built an incredible career, playing everything from smooth-talking con men to CIA power players like in Captain America, The Winter Soldier. He had that charm. But long before the popularity, before the cameras, Redford faced one of the scariest things a kid could go through back in the 1940s: polio. Redford was just 11 years old when it hit. One minute he was out swimming at the beach, just being a kid, and the next, something felt off. Redford had pushed himself too hard in the water, and when he came out, his body wasn't right. Soon, symptoms hit fast. Doctors soon confirmed what every parent feared in the 1940s and 50s. He had polio. It was called a mild case, but it was bad enough to keep him stuck in bed for 2 brutal weeks. There wasn't a widely available vaccine yet, and even so-called mild cases could leave damage. For a kid who used to run wild through the streets of Santa Monica, being trapped in bed like that was terrifying. Years later, Redford talked about it in an interview with Fresh Air. He said it was a mild case, but it was still enough to scare him. Though it didn't get worse, it definitely left a lasting mark on him. But polio wasn't the only challenge Redford faced growing up. Way before he became a Hollywood icon, he had a dangerously rebellious side that almost took his life in an entirely different direction. Believe it or not, Oscar-winning director was once a troublemaker. That's right. Back in Van Nuys, California, Redford ran with a rough crowd. He was part of a street gang in high school, always getting into risky situations. One day, the guys dared him to jump off a building something stupidly high, and if he didn't do it, he'd be labeled a coward. So, of course, he jumped. No hesitation, just pure adrenaline and teenage recklessness. Miraculously, he survived without breaking a single bone. But the rush of adrenaline and the thrill of defying fear stuck with him. In his 2011 memoir, Robert Redford, The Biography, he looked back on how those moments shaped him. He said that facing down fears hit him early and that life seemed to come with 2 choices. You could either be led by your fears or learn to overcome them. With his reputation secured, Redford kept running wild with his gang, getting into petty theft and other illegal stuff. Their favorite thing to do? Steal alcohol from nearby stores. At 16 years old, Redford was arrested for possession of stolen jewelry. For a while, it looked like his life could be heading in a much darker direction. But luckily for him, the charges were eventually dropped. And while that rebellious streak never fully left him, this run-in with the law was a turning point. The same kid who once jumped off rooftops and outran the cops later took that fearless energy and channeled it into something much bigger, pursuing a career in Hollywood. The many tragedies of Robert Redford's life. While Redford was lucky enough to survive his childhood battle with polio, some of his closest family members weren't as fortunate. The losses he experienced have definitely left deep marks on him. However, his first major heartbreak came when he was just 18 years old. In 1955, his mother, Martha Redford, passed away at the young age of 40 due to a hemorrhage. Her death was linked to a blood disorder that developed after the stillbirth of her twin daughters 8 years earlier, a tragedy that had already taken a toll on the family. More than 60 years later, during the 2018 Sundance Film Festival's Utah Women's Leadership Celebration, Redford paid an emotional tribute to his mother. Looking back on their relationship, he admitted he had been a rebellious teen who probably caused her a lot of stress. But despite everything, she never stopped believing in him. He recalled that she had always just trusted that he had something in him that would eventually turn out okay. Sadly, Martha never got the chance to see her sons rise to stardom. Just 5 years after her passing, Redford made his screen debut, kickstarting a career that would eventually make him one of the most beloved names in Hollywood. Speaking to the star-studded audience at the 2018 Utah Women's Leadership Celebration, which included longtime friend and collaborator Jane Fonda, Redford reflected on his mother's legacy. He praised her infectious smile, adventurous nature, and her ability to stay optimistic through difficult times. But even as he celebrated her memory, he opened up about a painful regret he had carried for years. Redford admitted that he had taken her for granted when he was younger, saying that kids often didn't realize what they had. What hurt the most, he said, was that she passed away before he ever had the chance to thank her. That regret lingered with him for much of his life.
I didn't have any idea that things were going to decline after that for so many reasons. It was kind of sad.
This, in a way, was a quiet reminder that even the most successful people carry their own emotional burdens. But that's not all. Redford's early years were filled with absence, not just through loss, but through distance. His father, Charles Redford, worked long hours as a milkman, which left little room for bonding. But where his father was unavailable, Redford found a father figure in his uncle David. David was athletic, intelligent, and someone Redford looked up to. They often played football together, practicing passes and sharing moments that helped fill the gap left by his father's absence. But that bond was tragically cut short. When World War II broke out, David enlisted in the army. In 1945, while crossing a bridge in Luxembourg in a jeep, he was caught in crossfire and killed. He never came home. The pain of losing his uncle was made harder by how his family handled grief, by not really handling it at all. In a 2013 interview with NPR, Redford explained that his family just didn't talk about it. He said that it happened, no one asked many questions, and everyone simply moved on. He believed that kind of emotional detachment was built into the structure of their household. Over the years, Redford learned to channel those bottled-up feelings into his craft. His passion for sports, in films like Downhill Racer and The Natural, wasn't just about playing a role. It was about connecting with his own past. The loss eventually shaped him into the introspective, resilient person he became. That emotional depth became especially clear in his directorial debut, Ordinary People. The Oscar-winning film, which explores a family's silent suffering and emotional repression, reflected Redford's own experiences growing up in a home where feelings were rarely spoken about. Another terrifying ordeal. By the late 1950s, things were finally looking up for Redford. He had married Lola Van Wagenen, landed his first Broadway role in Tall Story, and welcomed his first child, Scott. But then, tragedy wasn't far behind. In November 1959, just 10 weeks after his first son Scott was born, he passed away from what would later be known as sudden infant death syndrome. Redford was devastated. In an interview with The Mirror, he revealed that he and Lola were very young at the time. and didn't know anything about SIDS. He blamed himself for not checking on the baby sooner, saying the loss left a scar that never completely healed. Just 3 years later, in 1962, Redford and Lola faced another scare. Their second son, David James Redford, was born prematurely with hyaline membrane disease, the same condition that had taken the life of JFK's infant son, Patrick. Doctors told them he only had a 40% chance of survival, and it left them feeling helpless. But against the odds, both mother and baby made it through. Redford later said it had been a huge relief for them. But even as his career took off, Redford's personal life was far from picture perfect. In a 1998 People interview, he said people often assumed his life had been easy and admitted that it was frustrating because it simply wasn't true. He shared that the hardest thing in the world was when your kids struggled and that their family had taken hit after hit that most people never saw, and he preferred to keep it that way for their sake. Then, in 1983, another tragedy struck, this time involving his daughter Shauna. Her boyfriend, journalism student Sid Wells, was found shot in the head in his apartment near the University of Colorado. His roommate, Thane Smiker, was the main suspect. He was supposed to pay rent that day and was arrested, but there wasn't enough solid evidence to press charges. Not long after, Smiker vanished. His car turned up in Beverly Hills in 1986, but he was never seen again. Authorities believe he may have left the country. The case was reopened in 2010 when new evidence came to light. Prosecutors approved an arrest affidavit, and police even released age-progressed images of Smiker, hoping to finally track him down. But still nothing. In a 1997 interview with the Minnesota Star-Tribune, Redford said the case felt like a half-open door with a very dark room behind it. But not all of Redford's formative relationships were marked by tragedy. His friendship with Natalie Wood played a huge role in his early career. The two first met back in high school, and later, when Wood was already an established star, she reportedly recommended Redford for Inside Daisy Clover, the film that helped launch him. They reunited the next year for This Property is Condemned, and their bond only grew stronger. But in 1981, Wood drowned off Catalina Island during a boat trip with her husband, Robert Wagner, and actor Christopher Walken. The circumstances around her death have always been unclear, and the speculation continues to this day. Redford, who usually kept his private life quiet, didn't hesitate to pay tribute. He lent his voice to a moving segment on Turner Classic Movies.
We don't have it yet. Somebody has got to confirm the content of those memos.
And appeared in the 2020 HBO documentary What Remains Behind, which celebrated her life. Losing a child once is unthinkable, but in 2020, Redford and his ex-wife Lola faced that pain all over again. Their son Jamie died at 58 from liver cancer. He had battled liver disease for much of his life and had received a transplant in the 90s. Since then, he'd worked to raise awareness about organ donation, even starting his own foundation. But while waiting for another transplant in 2019, he was diagnosed with bile duct cancer. Jamie's wife, Kyle, shared the heartbreaking news on social media, saying the family was devastated and that he had lived a beautiful, impactful life and was deeply loved. Redford's publicist later added that the grief of losing a child was beyond words. She described Jamie as a loving son, husband, and father, and said his legacy would live on through his films, his activism, and his commitment to the environment. Now, nearing 90, Redford is more reflective and easygoing. He's endured deep personal loss over the years, but he continues to embrace life fully. For a man who once jumped off rooftops and challenged the Hollywood system, it seems fitting that he's still writing his story on his own terms. What Robert Redford film was your favorite? Share your thoughts with us in the comments down below. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more royal updates. Also, be sure to check out the next video on your screen. You won't want to miss it.